This episode is brought to you by Greenskies Analytics, an audit analytics service provider that works with internal audit departments that have data analysts and are still frustrated with trying to make analytics actually work, aren't getting the expected ROI, who can't break through the communication barrier between the analysts and the audit team, and those that need experienced direction for an audit analytics strategy and process. Those that feel like they've wasted time and money on trainings, aren't getting the value they want, not prioritizing the highest risk areas for the organizations, or have projects that seemingly never get completed. Do you deal with any of that? If you do, go to the show notes of this episode and click the Greenskies Analytics link, or go to greenskiesanalytics.com to schedule a call and understand how Greenskies Analytics makes analytics actually work for internal audit. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Audit Podcast. I'm your host, Trent Russell, and very similarly to last week's episode, this is a best of the how-to. So we've curated this list of examples where people have walked through and said, this is how you actually do the thing that we're talking about doing. Again, from last week, if you listened, you know, thought leadership, in my opinion, is great, fantastic. The goal of the show, though, really is to get the how-to out of people. And so I mentioned last week also, my favorite follow-up question to guests is, it's cool, how? You know, how do you do that? And so with that said, this is part 2 of the how-to best of, whatever we're going to call this. Here we go. First up, we have Reid. He's the Senior Vice President of Compliance, and he's the Chief Audit Executive at Judson Health System, how to add value to your organization. And in talking to Andre over the years, I have seen when he's on, camera in his office, he's got a whiteboard in the background with the words in all caps in red, value. So if there's anyone that could speak to this, and it's like never changed. It's always that. He's never like erased it or anything. It seems like it's always been that same. All caps, red, value. So all I had to say, if there's anyone that could speak to this and lives it, breathes it, believes in it, then it is absolutely Andre. So we've talked a few times, Andre, and every single time you've been in that same room, you've had that same whiteboard in the background, and you've always had in all caps, for those that are watching the video on our YouTube, the highlight reel, if you're watching on LinkedIn, whatever, you'll see in caps, value. And that's there every single time. Why do you have that? And I can't read the rest of it, so you can go into more detail, but why? Why is that every time we talk, why is that always back there?
Whenever my team comes into my office, and they know me very, very well, and I actually written this on the whiteboard, I want to say 8 years ago. And not erase it. I keep it very simple. And at the top of it, I have quality objectives. Because at the end of the day, it's always about quality. A lot of times in our position, you cannot quantify in regards to the value you bring sometimes. So it's about a quality initiative on a lot of different things. I have 4 points on there, very simple. Just do it right the first time. No shortcuts. And also consistently follow the process. In audit, in anything, it's always about a process. And a process will last long for individuals in a position, so it's a plug and play. As long as you have a process that's actually woven into a system, everything should run smooth. And the last but not least, and I always talk about identify feasible solutions for problems. Whenever my team actually come to me, and instead of always bringing me a problem, at least bring me potential solutions. And the same approach that I would have in terms of like my expectations that the executive senior leadership team and also the board members will have of me, I put that same expectation on my team, because I always want to make sure, as part of my role in leadership is development. And I have to get them to thinking in a certain type of manner in regards to always be solution oriented, always be, problem solving, not identifying the problem, but how can we fix this? Because in our role, a broad view of the entire organization, how things actually run and how different parts, such as different areas.
Next, we have Chief Audit Executive Dr. Lenz, and he is talking through actionable tips to be more effective. What's an actionable takeaway that the listeners can apply to their audit role to actually be more effective?
Well, thanks, Trent, for the invite. And thanks for the opportunity to discuss with you. I would boil that down to the slogan, there is nothing as practical as a good theory. And I see much value in the theory from Professor Jody Hoffer-Gittel. She's from Brandeis University's Heller School in Boston. And she came up with the relational coordination theory. And I have applied that theory, I think, implicitly throughout my career in internal auditing. What does it say? It puts emphasis on 3 elements, and they are shared goals, shared knowledge, and mutual respect. And if you put this into action in your given context, with the board, with management, I think you've come a long way. And the 4th notion is communication. And once you have frequent and timely communication, problem-solving minded, I think you're on a good path to an effective internal audit. Now, I mean, for those interested in this topic, I spoke about that in my PhD thesis, and the work is continuing, so I keep learning on that. But I think it's worthwhile pursuing that path. So I'm working with Professor Jody on further insights. But I think that theory is a good base, to give direction.
Next up, we have Jami Shine. She is the Corporate and IT Audit Manager at Quick Trip, and she's talking through how to realize your strengths and weaknesses. You know that, like, when you would go for an interview, at least 15 years ago, I don't know how it is now, but they would typically, it's, oh, what's your strength? And the way people were coached back then was like, hey, pick something, or what's your weakness? Hey, pick something that's actually a strength and say that you do it so well. I'm a perfectionist, and because of that, I spend too much time on projects, or whatever it is. And you're like, okay, yeah. But I think that got figured out. Like everybody started to recognize that and go, all right, come up, do something better. But how has your recognition of your strengths through strength finders made you go, oh, this is how it is a weakness, and have you adapted to that to any degree?
Definitely. I think that a lot of times our biggest strengths are also our biggest weaknesses. So context, it's a great strength when I use it correctly, but it can also lead to me spinning sometimes, or overanalyzing things, or thinking, oh, well, this must be connected to this, when maybe they're not really connected. And so I really have to keep it in check. Another one of my top strengths is competition. So I think it's pretty easy to understand how that could be a weakness. I love to win, which isn't a bad thing. I also do not like losing. And so I've had to be really careful to make sure that I'm always being a team player, and that I'm not wanting to win at the expense of anyone else, that I'm wanting our team to win. I'm wanting the company to win. I'm not wanting to get credit for something. And that can be hard, right? As auditors, we're going to get so much more buy-in for recommendations if we're not taking the credit for them, if we're helping our clients come up with ideas instead of trying to be this like superhero. And so I think it's important to, when we're thinking about our strengths, to also see the other side of every strength and realize it can be a weakness.
Next up, we have the head of risk and ESG solutions at Audit Board, Judson Aiken. Judson's going to talk us through how to get started with ESG and the various frameworks that you can use, the leverage that are out there. It's some of the best free advice, I think, relative to ESG for those that not only looking to launch, but then mature and grow in that also. Probably one of the best just single pieces of information, pieces of audio, video, whatever we want to call it, out there available specifically for ESG. Would you recommend, I mean, it seems like it would make sense to me, if you're in an industry that probably historically hasn't had a focus on this, hit up some of your peers in those industries that have, the audit folks especially, obviously if you're in internal audit. I mean, if nothing else, what are the expectations on this? Like, what kind of requests have you typically gotten in the past, or things like that? Is that a good place to start? I know most internal audit departments are resource strapped, and so I know a lot of folks need to leverage their network to at least kick these sorts of initiatives off.
Oh, yeah. I mean, benchmarking is a huge part of it. I think that the good thing is something like 98% of the S&P 500 has issued an ESG report in the last 2 years. And so there's a lot of content you can go and just look at their report. Hey, which frameworks are they aligned against? SASB, TCFD, GRI, CDP. Those are some of the big ones.
Okay.
But look at your peers and say, hey, what are our peers doing? there's some scoping kind of baked into this, which is called the materiality assessment. CSRD has a double materiality assessment. The whole point of that is really similar to a risk assessment, where you are identifying what is material for my company. What should I be disclosing on? A big part of that is surveying all your stakeholders. So internal stakeholders, employees, executives, external stakeholders like customers, investors, community members. I think what we see ESG teams doing and larger companies doing is saying, hey, who are our stakeholders and what do they care about? What do they want us to be reporting on? Let's make sure we're meeting our stakeholders' expectations.
Lastly, we have JT Erwin. He is the manager of data analytics for the internal audit group at First Horizon Bank, and he's talking about how to get into data as an auditor. I know there's a lot of folks that maybe they do have that level of curiosity, but then they just aren't able to get the buy-in that they need from their manager, CAE, whoever it is. So how are you able to do that, to say, hey, I was an auditor, now I'm more of a data person, let me go be the data person full-time?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think everyone can appreciate that historically in internal audit departments, there was no data person. There was no position for, this is our data analytics group, this is our manager of data, anything like that. That, of course, now things are rapidly changing and evolving, but historically that hasn't been there. So there's definitely some friction in trying to move into there, and not only move in to do that, but to really move up and advancing your career into leadership. So kind of how I've made sure that not only am I now the data guy, the data person, or helping with the data team, I want to prove value that this is bringing, not only in audit test work and being more efficient and giving more audit insights, but being a true leadership asset to the department. And so what I do strategically is, one, everything I do, I sell it, it has to have value. It has to have the highest value of anything I can be doing right now. I know that value. Two is I need to be able to tell other people what that value is. So we have a really good tracking and onboarding process for every analytic or strategic plan that we have that we do. And then we quantify it. How many transactions did we touch? What's the dollar value of those transactions? What are the insights? How many trends? Did we have something repeatable made? Maybe it's continuous monitoring made. Maybe a bot was made. You know, there's extra things. Is it something that's been leveraged outside of the department so that we can get that cross-functional buy-in? A whole range of things that really sell and quantify exactly what we do. And that also helps me plan, like, if I have to choose between two projects, I'm going to do the one that does the most value to the stakeholders that matter most to me, that are going to be at the tables that I'm not at, to advocate for me.
Yeah. So it's a triage process that you have.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I really like using those also because it does, you can get very caught up in, let me go do this little piece of this project. It'll only take me 20 minutes. And then 2 hours later, you're banging your head on the screen going, why does this thing still not work? So to be able to ruthlessly prioritize and go, nope, this is it. This is the thing that I'm working on is a really good practice for sure. Hey everyone, thank you very much for listening to this episode of the Audit Podcast. Whatever platform you're listening on right now, I'm sure there's a subscribe button somewhere, so please hit the subscribe button there. If you're listening through iTunes or Spotify, feel free to go give us that 5-star rating. It only took me about 16 seconds to give myself a 5-star review, and it really helps to get future guests to come on the show, so we'd really appreciate that. Lastly, be sure to check out the show notes and follow us on all our social media channels on Instagram, on LinkedIn, and on TikTok. Also, if interested, please sign up for our weekly newsletter from the Audit Podcast. Thank you all. Have a great one.